Welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Traveling Storyteller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. BookEnds is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. BookEnds programs from previous authors are now available on the website of the Wadena County Historical Society. Today's program will also be available on the website shortly, and that website is www.wadenacountyhistory.org. This month's speaker, we are happy to say, is Mike Lein. Mike Lein is known across the North Country for his many published stories of cabin life with dogs, boats, relatives, and friends. His award-winning books include Firewood Happens, Down at the Dock, and the Crooked Lake Chronicles. And his newest book is called Cabin Fever. I want to tell you before we get started that our next month's BookEnds will be held Saturday, December 11th, and will feature the cozy mystery author M.E. Fuller. If you ever have any questions for today's author, feel free to enter them through chat. And if you'd like to order books, you may do through our bookseller, Gillette, and she is online right today, and her email is travelingstoryteller@gmail.com. So now let's welcome BookEnds Online Edition, Mike Lein.
Thanks for having me, Lina, and others. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm coming from literally the second weekend of deer camp from my cabin on the edge of the Paul Bunyan State Forest, north of Nevis, Minnesota. And it's kind of appropriate because that's what my books are about. They're mainly about life at the cabin. I'll just give you a quick rundown. A little bit of history. I worked in the environmental services industry for a county for many years. So I've got an environmental background, always been interested in hunting and fishing, the outdoors, and actually used to come up here to the Nevis Park Rapids area as a kid, just like a lot of people, and have fun at resorts. So back in 1992, my wife and I bought 5 acres here on a small natural environment lake that's mainly public land, and started building a cabin a few years later. So in the meantime, I'd kind of taken up writing as a kind of a diversion for my job. I was looking for new challenges and stuff, and did a lot of magazine articles on life at the cabin, the people you meet and the things that happen. And when as I put it, graduated from a real job about 6 years ago, I started doing books. Books take a lot of time. There are a lot of preparation work and working with editors and illustrators and things like that, things that I just didn't have time to do when I had a real full-time job. So my first book, Firewood Happens, came out about 5 years ago. You'll see it's got a nice shiny gold sticker on it here. It won the first place award for humor from the Midwest Independent Publishers Association that year. That's a association of a lot of the smaller publishers around the Midwest, 7 or 8 states around the Midwest, and they do a Midwest Book Awards thing. And once again, note that it got a award for humor. I call it a simple book about the simple life, and it's about 30 stories, mainly humorous, pretty short, meant to be read 1 or 2 at a time on a rainy day or in front of the fireplace, and hopefully with a humorous bent. A year later, I did another book, Down at the Dock. I had a lot of stories in my library built up from my magazine writing days when I was working, still working full time. And notice it also has the shiny sticker. It won a back-to-back award for humor from, again, the Midwest Independent Publisher. And this one, I just give you a little idea of my writing journey. This one is longer, and while I call Firewood Happens, the first book, kind of an innocent book, this one's maybe not quite so innocent. We get into heavy-duty subjects like skinny dipping, Bigfoot, stealing firewood, a few things like that, So I was trying to show a little more breadth in my writing than from the simple, innocent stories in the first one. 2 years later, I came out with, 2 years ago, the Crooked Lake Chronicles. This one is kind of carries on writing stories about the things that happen at the cabin, the people you meet, things that happen, struggles with old lawnmowers. And what a little bit different from the first two, in that I started concentrating a little more on the cabin life and not so much on some of the activities such as hunting and fishing. There's still some hunting and fishing in it because that's part of my life. It's part of life in the North Woods. But I found a lot of my readers were, well, some of them loved it. Other people were, particularly some women who didn't come from a hunting and fishing family background, were saying, I just didn't relate to that as well. So I decided to put a lot of my hunting and fishing stories to the side and just do a specific book of them, which is under construction, not out yet, and just concentrate on this series of books on a little bit on more of the cabin things. So with that, I thought, well, I don't need to do another cabin book for a few years or all, but there was a thing called the lockdown in 2020, the pandemic, and lo and behold, cabin fever happened. I didn't have a whole lot to do, as a lot of us did, and having a background in environmental issues, including a lot of work with dealing with pandemics, not that we had one, but training for dealing with pandemics and public health and things like that, including quite a few sessions with Dr. Michael Osterholm, who's of course now a presidential advisor and stuff. My wife and I took it fairly seriously and, spent a lot of time at home, as a lot of people did. So cabin fever came out of that process. I've got a few other books that are in the works right now, kind of an adventure book and the hunting and fishing story one, but this one just kind of leaped off the pages as I was sitting there, locked down in cabin fever and having cabin fever. Did a few different things with it and everything too. The cover, you'll notice, is probably, the people call it a warmer cover. Well, particularly Firewood Happens has got a nice bright cover. This one's got what they call a warm cover. It doesn't have a sticker yet because it hasn't had a chance to get into the award process, but of course I'm hopeful for it. Those processes happen this winter. We also went to a little bit different font, which you probably can't see inside, but I've always been inspired by Sigurd Olson and his books, including Listening Point, which I call the best Minnesota cabin book ever written. We kind of jumped to the font that he actually used in his books, which are published, or at least now published, by the Minnesota Historical Society. I think it gives it, we really look for a good old-timey feel for the book and the font and the illustrations. Simple. My artist will do the cover based on a photograph I took and then do a simple illustration to start each chapter. Cabin fever is also a little different than the other ones, if people are aware of those, and that it's got longer stories, fewer stories, but longer ones, a little bit more in depth, where the other books have 30 to 35 stories, perhaps, 1,000 to 1,500 words long. This one has, I believe, 17 or 18 stories that are, the book is the same length, but a little bit more in depth. Let's see. Some of the stories, now, people might want to say, well, you wrote a book about the pandemic. We're not interested in that. We would like to forget 2020 and the pandemic lockdown. This is really an escape from the lockdown and the pandemic issues and everything. The pandemic is mentioned in the beginning and the end, but in the meantime, we just talk about the fun things that we had done or wanted to do, while we were thinking about it. With that, I think, let me just read as a little bit of an introduction. I want to read part of the foreword. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm always hesitant to read too much of my books. I figure people want to do the reading themselves, but I'll read to you a part of the foreword in here, which I think will give you a little bit of idea of where we're going with this book. The beginning. I was sitting at the cabin's kitchen table on Super Bowl night, listening to the big game on an old school AM radio channel when the name for this book came to me. I couldn't get the game on any of the 3.5 channels the cabin TV brings in, and I didn't really care. I had a snack tray full of sausage and cheese and olives and a 500 milliliter mini box of cheap red wine. That's one way of dealing with cabin fever. It had already been a rewarding winter trip to the cabin. The night before, I volunteered at Itasca State Park, helping at one of their winter events, a lantern-lit snowshoe hike through the pines out to Schoolcraft Point. I volunteer at these things for several reasons. One is that deep sense of civic responsibility instilled in me by my parents and others associated with the Western Minnesota Scandinavian culture I was born into. Another more official reason is to score volunteer hours needed to keep my Minnesota Master Naturalist title. I'll admit I'm sometimes come up a little short on the 40 hours of volunteer work needed. So why not get an early start for once? And besides, civic duty and record keeping, it got me outside on a winter night. I can't think of a better way to beat cabin fever. More than 200 fellow hardy Minnesotans of all ages and a few others from lands such as Wisconsin and Iowa showed up and went stomping along on snowshoes for over a mile-long hike beneath a silver half moon and the brightest stars you've ever seen. Most of the crowd stopped back at the trailhead after the hike to roast marshmallows over a campfire, safely stoked by another volunteer. Some even brought their hot dogs and had a family picnic in the great outdoors under the stars at 25 degrees in January. January had been a dark and gloomy month, but the skies cleared for this event. A couple of other volunteers and I hung out far down the trail, ready with free advice, words of encouragement, and flashlights and radios should more serious help be needed. In reality, these folks needed little more than a few adjustments to snowshoe bindings and information on how much further it was to the end point. I did hear a few "Are we there yet?" questions from old and young alike, but no regrets about the surroundings or the experience. I ended the night by myself, the last one out on the trail, taking my time, slowly shuffling snowshoes through the forest, stopping in clearings surrounded with snow-flocked pines, enjoying the silence of the night and the stars and the moon at my own pace. As I sat back at the cabin the next night at my private Super Bowl sausage, wine, and cheese party, I sensed I was a lucky man, and that even though there was much more winter to come, I was well on my way to beating cabin fever, at least for this year, at least for 2020. Well, I guess I got that wrong. There's more to the foreword, but I'll kind of leave it at that. And again, stress that the book is meant to be a fun read, just like my other books have been. That kind of gets you an escape from life on the rainy day, the sunny morning out on the deck, or what have you. There doesn't really dwell on the issues of the pandemic. We'll leave that to other people. But it is mentioned, and there's a reason, because it was kind of born out of it. So, give you an idea, some of the other stories in the book deal with big events of previous years and that year. There's even an escape to a cabin down in Arizona with kind of a unique view. It's called A Room with a View. There's a story I call Hooked, which is deals with a little ice fishing accident I had. Another one, A Year in the Cabin Life. Some people seem to deal with 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter. If you're a cabin owner and you use your cabin all year round, you deal with a lot more seasons than that, and I try to lay those out in there. Fear of Fly Fishing talks about a trip we took to a cabin out in Wyoming, and the Yellowstone National Park, and some adventures ahead there, and dealing with trying to learn how to fly fish. And finally, When Worlds Collide is probably the end story, and probably the one which won't fit into necessarily the humor category, but brings up a series of events that I think happened last year, where in most years would just be, that was kind of sad, but it happened, But in this year, 2020, really brought up a whole underlying level of emotions, and I guess you call turmoil, that were lying there latent, spinning around in the back of your mind. And you wonder, after things happen, you just go, why did I react to that so differently than I would have? Well, it was 2020. And besides, suffering from bad case of cabin fever. We're still dealing with issues with the pandemic and everything. So with that, that's kind of an overview of the book and the process I used to come up with it and everything. Questions for me? I could do some more reading.
So Mike, this latest book of yours almost seems to be veering a little from humor and into the memoir category, where you're taking an event or something important, a theme. I'm thinking of a memoir that I wrote, that I read a few years ago, that was centered around the little black dress, and where these stories are more kind of a recollection of personal emotional reactions to cabin life. And what do you think? Do you think you might be edging into memoir a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely draw on, especially for this book. I think I have in some of the other books, but for example, there is a story in this book of, it's called Spring Fever, not cabin fever, but spring fever, which dives back into the 70s when I was going to school at Bemidji State College north of here, and got a case of spring fever, and things kind of went wrong. And then, but apparently I didn't learn anything, because 40 years in the future, the same thing happens again. So yeah, I definitely deal with or in some of the books, definitely get back into the memoir type of stuff too, and try to take a look back at the events that happened in my life, and usually again with a humorous, and like I can say in this case, yeah, didn't learn much there. So.
I think a common misconception is that memoir is all deeply serious and heavy and emotional and probably sad or bitter, but there actually is a lot of humorous memoirs as well. Thinking again of the one that I read, which was about centered around a little black dress. And probably the reason I don't actually read a lot of memoir unless it is more skewing towards the humor. So the audience for Cabin Fever, I think, will be a lot broader than just the Northwoods types.
Yeah, I would hope so. Now, I have found that, people do have some misconceptions about my writing and my books that hopefully I can help them deal with. For example, a lot of people think, oh, you were in the environmental business for about 40 years. Boy, you must write some heavy stuff about the environment. No, I leave that to other people. I do try to bring in an ethic, I think, and things like that, and not in a preaching way, just this is the way I do things, and often, look back at mistakes I've made and stuff, without getting into that heavy writing that I had to do for, 35, 40 years or whatever. This was an escape from that and stuff. And also people go, well, I bet, your main audience is men who hunt and fish. Well, most of the books, all 4 of the books, are about things that happen at the cabin, not hunting and fishing, though there is hunting and fishing in there. I am a hunter, I'm a fisherman. I make no bones about that, and I enjoy it, but I don't write either about bagging the big deer, catching the big fish necessarily. It's more about the experience you have, sometimes often humorous, while you're out there and doing that and everything. And also, it seems to surprise people, but I've kind of done a poll, and about 90%, that's 9 out of 10 of the people that buy my books are women. For one thing, women tend to buy more books than men, I think I find. And, but they, by and large, enjoy them too, for the cabin experience and the, it's Minnesota stuff, I call it, and everything. And of course, many women have brothers, fathers, husbands, or whoever acquaintances that hunt and fish, so they can relate to that part of it to a certain degree too, and everything. Now, on the other hand, I do have man after man come to me and say, my wife got me this, bought me this book, and I really loved it. I loved how I could read it, pick it up, put it down, come back to it in a few days or whatever, and keep on reading it without having to follow 30 characters. So I do get a lot of comments like that from men who do really enjoy the book once they get into it. So.
So I know you had to write a lot of serious, heavy stuff when you were full-time employed. A lot of our viewers are actually not novice writers looking to get published. Do you send any of your short essays out to magazines in addition to or are stories that are in your books, were they previously published in or submitted to magazines?
Yeah, my first published story was in the early 2000s, and it was for the Lake Country Journal magazine out of Brainerd. So I found when I was working, had a full-time job, I could do short stories one at a time and send them out to magazines. I could handle that, but I couldn't handle the deep dive and concentration it took into writing a book and following through on it. Even books like this with short stories, I hope to put a flow into them and a certain theme and everything. Probably more successful in others than some than not. But yeah, so I actually have had published some 75 different magazine articles in 25 different magazines, including things like the Minnesota DNR's magazine, the Conservation Volunteer, which is a real badge of honor for any Minnesota nature or outdoor writer. I've had several articles published by them. I've gotten away from that since I, as I put it, graduated from work, because I find the books a little more fulfilling and I'm a little more in control of my thing. I can go out, I can meet with a bookstore owner, convince them to buy my books. I can do an event, sell books myself. I can work on them at my own pace, and I can see the end point. Sometimes when my record on a magazine article was over 2 years from submittal to actually being published. So there's not a whole lot of instant gratification there. I still do some. Next month's Fur, Fish and Game magazine will have an article about last year's trip to Montana my son and I took deer hunting. So I do write for some, but it's usually magazine editors that have gotten to know me, and they will actually contact me and say, "Hey, Mike, what do you got?" That type of thing. I don't necessarily pursue that so much more.
So I don't know if you are aware of National Novel Writing Month.
Yes, very much aware of it.
So
and my hat's novel writers.
So they've actually expanded it's shortened to NaNoWriMo, and it happens every November. And the goal is to write 50,000 words in the month of November. And they've expanded it so it does not necessarily have to be a novel. It just needs to be a single writing project. Have you participated in NaNoWriMo with any of your writing projects, or have you thought about it?
No, I've thought about it, but I have several things. One, the time you have to invest in it in that period of time is, and here again, I go, the hats off to people that can do it. I'm, for lack of a better term, a little scatterbrained sometimes, and I've got a lot of other things going. I'd say I'm out collecting material. I'm out on a hunting trip, a fishing trip. I'm taking a lap around the lake and the pontoon, looking at nature. I'm collecting material. And I write about it, tend to do most of my writing in the winter. And I haven't found a way to really focus on that. And besides that, I've found since I retired, I hate schedules. I really hate being keyholed into a schedule. I like to do more on I did that for 40 years. I tend to like to be able to, well, once a day I can just take a flyer and go do this or something like that, But I know I have got some friends that have done it. My writers group, the Jack Pine Writers Block here in Park Rapids, several people have participated in it. Great experience for those, which I should highlight too. If you're a novice writer, I always preach writers group, writers group, writers group. Find a writers group that you fit in with. You won't fit in with necessarily the first one you try out, but keep shopping around. You'll eventually find a group of people you fit in with that will give you good, constructive feedback on your writing, what you really need, not just, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. No, you don't need that. sometimes it will be, but you need people who will sit there and give you constructive input on it and everything. And I think that the NIMO or whatever is great for that too, because you do get feedback here. Yeah.
And participation in that whole kind of group atmosphere. I know that when I had the brick and mortar bookstore, there was a small writers group, younger, that for NaNoWriMo would meet at the bookstore. And it was just lovely to listen to them and just like peer in on the edges of that creative process.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I had another question, and like so many things in my life these days, it goes in one ear and out the other, and I'm not sure if it will ever actually make it to my vocal cords. So it's really good advice about joining a writing group. What's some other advice that you would give to people that are looking to start writing, or perhaps are writing now and looking to take that next step to becoming a published author?
Well, one of the things I tend to preach is that when you talk to a writer who's, let's say, not necessarily young, but young in their writing process, they will have a goal in mind, such as writing the great American novel, writing, younger people in particularly, what I call science fiction, what is also called fantasy and things like that. They want to write, what they're really good at, what they really like reading and everything. Sometimes you have to take a little bit more of not a direct path to that though, and get good at writing, because you have to get good at writing before you can write a good book. For example, that people, I think novel writers are held in very high esteem. If you can get that novel done, get it published and get it selling and everything, that is a big deal. But maybe you need to work in little steps to it, kind of like I did. I preached a method that I took that's not for everybody, but I started writing 1,000-word short stories about life at the cabin that magazines liked and published. And as you write more of them and interact more with the writers group and things like that, your writing style, kind of morphs and your writing hopefully gets better. You learn more, and then maybe you can take on more. I started with, like I said, the very short stories about life at the cabin, but I've also it's like a tree. It kind of grows. I've gotten into a little bit into travel writing, a little bit into food and cooking, the hunting and fishing, which as a kid growing up reading Field and Stream and Outdoor Life was always, ooh, that'd be really nice to be a writer like that, And of course, the cabin stories, the humor, and even a little bit of fiction here and there. I won the Talking Stick Award for a fiction piece a few years ago, a short story. So it's maybe you don't have to try and bite off that novel all at once, but start picking away at it, particularly if you have a busy work life like I had, and family life and all that. But keep on moving ahead, keep on doing something, keep on writing, and hopefully keep on growing. And eventually, hopefully you'll get there.
And I think this is also something that a previous guest on BookEnds, Ross Gay, mentioned, that if you start out with vignettes, that you don't have to focus on that whole novel. And really, if you think about writing the novel, at some point, your characters are going to be cooking, they're going to be traveling, they're going to be looking out at scenery. So you have to be comfortable writing in all of those different little micro areas.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of writing and research, do you write longhand? Do you write on a laptop? Do you write on a tablet? Do you have notes? Do you do research online? Do you go out with your journal in the canoe and hope that the ink and the paper don't get wet, or that you drop your tablet into the lake?
My most reliable way of doing things like that is taking pictures. Now, I used to I did a lot of photography at Bemidji State when I was there too. I was a biology major, but I really got hooked into the photography and everything too. So I generally have a camera on me, and I've morphed from the 35 millimeter, of course, we started with, and a bigger digital one of a nice, that took nice pictures. And then now I carry my smartphone. I've got a Google smartphone that has an excellent camera, except for the zoom features. But once you start zooming and all that, you can't replace the bigger digital cameras and the fancy lenses of that. But I use that as, not only do I take pictures that might end up in my book as a cover or a sketch, most of the magazine stories I sell require some sort of pictures to go with them and everything. But I found that the camera phone right now is as good as they get for some of that stuff. And I also use it as a journal. Okay, here is something I want to write about in the future. I've still got a pretty good memory, so that helps. I am terrible at taking notes or journaling. And one of the problems is I often can't read my own handwriting. So I'm the type of person, and I'm always in awe of people at writing workshops, which are another great thing for people who are given a writing prompt and away they go. And in 10 minutes, they have something that makes sense. And as you go, that is really good. I sit there and tend to let things spin around in my brain for a long time. And then it comes out on the computer screen. I write on the computer. I'm not a very good typist, but that's where just about all my writing happens. Unless I really get an epiphany when I'm out in the wilds of Montana or Wyoming or something and really feel I need to take some notes now, which I hope I can read later.
So I know that depending upon where I am, I myself can have a difficult time reading my handwriting. And Lina says that she also has that problem, that she can't read her own handwriting. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you were at Bemidji State. Did you perhaps run into another one of our treasured Minnesota authors, Will Weaver?
Will wasn't there, I don't believe, at the time I was there, which was the early to mid 70s. Now, Will happens to be one of my heroes. Okay, as a writer that writes, from this area that has made it big, and I've been to several seminars he's put on or writers' workshops and everything, and I've talked to him and just love some of his books, including a memoir he wrote about, I think it was called The Last Deer Hunter, about his hunting experiences with his father, which really surprised me, given his other stuff and everything. I wouldn't have realized that Will was a hunter, A great book. And also, there's some of his other books, like a young adult novel he wrote called Full Service, which I think he just nailed the young adolescent male working at a gas station in the 70s. In fact, I asked him, Will, you had to have done this, right? He goes, yeah, I did. And I said, I did too. And boy, did you nail this story. So, but at the time, there was an English professor there who was, look back at it, could have been a lot more of a mentor. And now, of course, his name escapes me. One of the halls is named after him. Yeah, here I'm having your problem, Gillette. It's escaping me and I can't come up with it. But who was my freshman English teacher and really pushed me to write more and write more. He said, you've got something there. But at the time I was a 18-year-old kid, long ways from home, and wasn't very confident and everything. And I actually kind of shoved him away and didn't follow up on that. I really wish I would have, but he's no longer there. Of course, he's moved on to the great beyond, but would have been a great example. And, maybe would have changed majors. I don't know. I did take a lot of higher level, including graduate literature classes as I was going through it. I did like to experiment and move around and stuff.
Excuse me, was that John Hassler?
No, it's
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, like I say, one of the actual buildings of Bemidji is named for him, and it's just escaping me. I'm having one of those ugly moments here, Yeah.
Would you like to read one of your shorter stories from one of your previous books?
Yeah, I could maybe do that. Why don't I let me grab one here. Here's one that was selected by the editor of Cabin Life. Now, Cabin Life is no longer in publication. It's morphed into a log home living, I believe. But I did quite a few stories for them back in the day, 10 years ago or whatever. And he chose this one as his favorite story in the magazine of, I suppose it was about the year about 2008 or 2009. And, here again, it's from the first book, Cabin Fever. And at the time I was still building the cabin, which I sort of am. It's not quite finished yet. And we have a very simple cabin, which we hope to find a contractor and put more complications in, like septic systems and sewer and wells and stuff next year. But anyway, this is back from that era when I'm still working on it. The story's called Deck Time. And there's a little picture, I don't know if you can see, of my cabin with the deck on it, kind of the same as the front cover of Firewood Happens. Let me try to read that, and it's fairly short. Deck time. I knew that building the cabin would be a complicated, time-consuming learning experience. Budgets, materials, schedules are natural issues on construction projects. These are bound to be multiplied when the labor force consists of yourself and whatever friends and relatives can be coerced into giving up some of their own valuable time. What I didn't expect was that the cabin would be a work in progress over 10 years from the start. In hindsight, a critical mistake was made early in the project. I added a deck to the front of the cabin. Every cabin should have a deck, patio, or similar defined outdoor area. Without one, the cabin may be usable, but not complete. However, the timing of the deck construction can be critical to the completion of the rest of the cabin. The most important advice I can offer to other do-it-yourself cabin builders is to not, under any circumstances, build the deck until the cabin is finished or at least livable. In my defense, this deck was built out of necessity. Providing a front step that was safer and had more curb appeal than a stack of wood pallets had my modest carpentry skills baffled. A deck on the front, the non-lake side, wasn't in our original plans since the lake was the focus of the building site. It happened because I knew how to build a deck. The expense was not so much, and we needed those steps. The critical mistake was failing to recognize what a distraction it would be to the rest of the cabin project, even without a view of the lake. Marcy brought a couple of canvas folding chairs as temporary furniture the minute the deck was usable. I wish you had got the small cheap ones instead of the sturdy, oversized chairs with the double cup holders. Their comfortable confines have proven to be more inviting than manual labor like sliding and shingling, especially when there is a beverage or two in the double cup holder. I had a helpful friend with a cooler full of snacks, and progress on the cabin can grind to a halt. I also discovered that our dogs love decks, especially if they get a chair of their own. The deck is a preferred spot to lie in ambush for bird feeder raiding chipmunks and squirrels. It also provides an elevated platform to leap off in pursuit of tennis balls, sticks, and other thrown objects. Thus, a deck, a dog, and a tennis ball can provide hours of entertainment while the building projects continue to suffer. On the positive side, my hammer swinging arm gets plenty of exercise and stays limber, throwing things through the mutts, just in case I find the time to tackle a project. The other deck-related distraction is worth mentioning: bird feeders, more accurately called chipmunk and squirrel feeders, are another necessity at the cabin. Bird seed should be a legitimate itemized expense on any cabin owner's taxes. Again, be careful. Bird watching from the deck can turn into a time-killing distraction, especially if you add hummingbird feeders like we did. Now cute hummingbirds buzz the deck during the best 4 working months of the year. I can't say that hanging out on the deck has been a total waste of time. I have picked up some important and interesting knowledge. Like how fierce and territorial male hummingbirds are, guarding feeders with iridescent ruby and emerald colors, flashing and vocalizing displeasure at their kin in angry munchkin twittering. Add that a chipmunk can stuff cheek pouches to bursting with birdseed and still be light enough on his 4 little feet to escape the charge of a Labrador retriever. I can also tell which of my wood duck houses are occupied during the hours of patient observation from the comfort of my chair. The biggest problem with how easy it is to kick back, put my feet up on the deck railing and take a long summer nap in the shade with the dog at my feet. I fear that one day I'll awaken from a Rip Van Winkle deck nap and find that the aspen leaves of autumn are falling down around me, swirling like a blizzard of golden snowflakes. But unlike Rip Van Winkle, nothing in my world have changed. The outhouse roof will still be leaking, and the firewood won't be stacked. A summer's worth of undone cabin projects will still be waiting. So, so again, that was a favorite one from Firewood Happens.
Okay, that was good. I enjoyed that. And it's always good to get a little peek into the books directly from the author. Another writing question that I have is, and we might have covered this and I might just not be connecting the dots in my head. How is the writing process different for your humor writing than from the professional writing you did during your career, outside, of course, of being on a schedule?
Well, there are some things that are similar. For example, and I say this not necessarily jokingly, I had to write about technical issues for politicians. So I had to write in a simple manner so politicians could understand technical, complicated issues. And keep it short and to the point for presentations to county boards. I work for a county and everything. So I've got what I call a pretty simple writing style, but it probably grew out of that and having to keep it that, and also press releases for public things. Like I developed a lot of recycling programs. So you had to write things to tell people who were just learning at the time how to recycle and stuff. Of course, one of the differences, of course, is that humor is not necessarily a good thing when you're a public servant writing something. Not everybody has a different sense of humor. And when I'm writing a book, if you don't think it's funny, that's fine. Move on. I'll refund the price of the book, I guess, or whatever. But things are you have to be much more cautious in public life like that. And I was the director of a big department with people working for me, and a lot of public awareness and stuff. So I had to keep things simple, and I had to be careful with using humor. Now, when
I know when I was a technical writer for the state of North Carolina, it absolutely no humor is allowed in technical writing at all, just the facts.
So, I could get away with it once in a while in a presentation to a friendly county board that I was dealing with, would have appreciated a little, but that got less and less too as things got televised and much more formal and what have you. And now I did a lot of writing at work, so that's probably where I developed a lot of my writing skills. One of the things I enjoyed doing was, for example, was grant proposals. And I look at them the same as a magazine article or a book. You're wanting to write something that's creative, meets certain guidelines, that the grant proposal will go, the person who's got the grant money and wants to give it to you will go, hey, that's a great idea. I really like that. So being a little bit of creative and coming up with new ideas worked very well for me. I made millions of dollars of money in grant writing, bringing in grants for the county department I worked for and stuff. So, again, you had to be creative and try and distance yourself from the rest of the flock of people who wanted the same pot of money. It's the same with a magazine editor who's he wants good stuff, and hey, this is a little bit creative. And that's where I kind of got my start with, some of the stories that are in Firewood Happens, where this isn't a guy writing about hanging out at his multi-million-dollar log cabin on Gull Lake in Brainerd. It's a little simpler thing that our readers might like, and it's got some humor to it. But it is that creative bent that I think the grant writing did help, and much the same. They're looking for something out of the ordinary and worth the giving money to or paying for somebody for. And that's always been one of my goals, is to write stuff that's good enough that people will actually go, hey, this is worth paying, whether it's buying a book or a magazine, or paying for it.
So talk a little bit about your marketing and how do you get yourself out there and get yourself to the attention of potential readers?
I do, a pretty much minimal amount on online. I do have a Facebook account that I use, but I use it more for a post a day or whatever. When I'm out in the woods, I see something interesting, or I'm on a trip or something, I'll make a post, about what am I doing, something that might show up in the next book or so. But most of my stuff is, I really enjoyed the personal contact. So I will go to independent bookstores, walk in the door and introduce myself and try to get to know the owner of the store, and hopefully have them buy my books either directly from me or through the various book distributors that carry them, and I've been pretty successful at that. I also enjoy doing book events with bookstores, where you get to sit down and the people come in and you're the featured writer of the day. I also do a lot of arts and craft fairs, where again, I get to, especially in the holiday season here and during the summer, I'll work with a gift shop or a bookshop up here to do a book signing event. That's really the fun part, where you get to meet people and talk a lot. And in the summer, when I'm working up north here, often it's, sharing cabin experiences. Oh yeah, I read your first book. I really love this story. Here's an experience I had. Or talking about their lake. I've spent a lot of time in the North Country, so I know a lot of lakes and a lot of different parts of it. So it's just fun. I enjoy the meeting with people, talking to people, dealing directly with them. And I've found that that's pretty successful. The books sell very well in gift shops as well as bookstores up here, particularly in the North Country. But I have found that they also translate to other parts of the state, where I work all across the state of Minnesota. And the cabin life seems to be a common Minnesota theme, particularly if you're born here and everything. You go to Uncle Fred's cabin like I did when you were a kid, or you head up north on a vacation to Brainerd or Park Rapids or Grand Rapids or Ely or Grand Marais or something like that. So it's a pretty common Minnesota experience, even if you don't own a cabin, that you go visit one or something.
And do you confine yourself to Minnesota, or have you taken your author promotion on the road to neighboring states?
I haven't done much in neighboring states at this point and everything. I do get around a little bit, and I spread my books around when we're out, whether it's a trip to Arizona or Wyoming or Montana. I'll hand out a few copies of my books just to people. Yeah, of course, those states, you find a lot of people from Minnesota live there. And Montana, I'm often, start talking to someone, they see my license plate. Oh, you're from Minnesota? And I'll go, I bet you were too. No, but my uncle was. Or they go, yeah, I was. I moved here 10 years ago. Or, of course, Arizona, particularly in the bigger cities, it's, and if you're over 70, it's Minnesota, Iowa, Ontario, So.
November through February, half the state's population has to be from Minnesota, right?
Yeah, I actually moved my parents back from Arizona at the end of March a couple of years ago. And I was laughing as I was driving out of the town of Phoenix, out of one of the major routes. Every other vehicle was loaded up with grandma and grandpa and the shirts and the clothes on the rack across the back of the car, and the Minnesota or Iowa or Wisconsin plate. And they were headed up the same road, and you could tell they were doing the same thing I was, headed back to the North Country. So.
Well, I think that's about the end of my questions. Nobody else has questions that they've sent through chat. I don't know if anybody else has anything else they wanted to add, or.
I'm really delighted to hear Mike. Mike, you spoke one time at one of the places that was a bookstore in person. So I have met you in person, and I'm happy to say it even works through Zoom. Your personality is just charming, and your stories are wonderful. And we like to meet in person at some point. And we were even thinking about having a big party of everybody that was very successful doing something on Zoom this past year and a half it's been that
Oh,
we
it's
have been producing these.
kind of nice to have this view while I'm doing it too, you know?
Oh, this is great. Yeah.
Yeah, my inspiration, including, I guess, since it's deer camp, the whiskey bottle holding up my phone.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for
Tony
having
has a question.
me
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Yeah,
Having
I
been
really
a hunter and a fisherwoman and a lake person, I really connected with your work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my wife does a lot of fishing with us and everything too. And one of the stories in this book is we made the move to a pontoon last year, and that was a nice move. We get the whole family, 8 people and 4 dogs out on the pontoon. It's fun.
On the opposite end of things, I've been in a small boat up in Alaska, fishing for salmon.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Tony, you'll have to write your story.
I've got a lot of stories, but I don't think they'll be written.
I hear that a lot. People go, "You're writing about my life, but I can't write."
Well, thank you very much, Mike. And Gillette, why don't you tell people how they can order books easily?
Thank you. I always forget about that part. That's what we need Shelley for. Anybody who is interested in ordering books can check out the Travel and Story website at www.travelandstoryseller.indielight.org, or you can call the Historical Society, correct, Lina?
That is
And-
correct. I will order it for you.
Exactly. If I believe some of Mike's books are already in stock from the Firewood Happens book is already there, and they can very easily order. Just call, leave a message, or what's the email address for the Historical Society if they wanted to send an email, Lina?
603 wchs@arvig.net. And you can find all that information. Plus, eventually you'll see Mike's interview on our website, which is www.wadenacountyhistory.org. Hopefully that's simpler. Otherwise, you could just look me up in the phone book and call me. So,
There you go. There's just so many different ways, just like writing and publishing, and there's just always such a variety out there.
so thank you again for Mike for being
Thanks
part
for
of it.
and Gillette and Tony and whoever's out there. So,
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Mike.
thanks.